morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kelly Walsh, head of the middle school here at Chapel Hill-Chauncy Hall School. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that we are recording this webinar, and if you're interested, we'll have it available for you when we're finished. I wanted to start this morning by addressing a question some of you may be asking. How can this webinar be hosted by the Chapel Hill-Chauncy Hall Middle School? I didn't know CHCH even had a middle school. Well, as it turns out, just a little more than a year from now, we will open the doors of the Chapel Hill-Chauncy Hall Middle School to our first class of 8th grade students. Then a year later, we will include 7th grade along with our 8th grade, and we'll be off and running. Over the course of this academic year, we will be sharing the news and getting the word out about the middle school in a variety of different ways. Today's webinar is the first in a series of speakers, workshops, and events the middle school will host for families in the CHCH, Waltham, and greater Metro West community. And that brings me to the goal for today. This webinar is designed to help any and all parents and students think about getting back into the school routine with opening day just around the corner. Our panelists will share their expertise and advice to help each of us pause and think about how best to enter this new school year. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists before I turn things over to them. First, we're going to hear from Neil Hagen, Director of Counseling and Wellness here at CHCH, but some of you may also know Neil from his former role as one of our wonderful assistant directors at Running Brook Day Camps here on campus. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Ellen Geminiani, who is a physician in the sports medicine department at Boston Children's Hospital. She's also the consulting physician for us here at Chapel Hill-Chauncy Hall and helps our school community in many different ways. And finally, Kasey American Horse, our 9th grade class dean, history teacher, and dorm parent here at CHCH, will share her thoughts with us about approaching that first day and that first week at school. And I know I've often relied on Kasey and her expertise in organization, so I know she'll have some great things to share. After our panelists speak, we'll leave time for a Q&A. But if you have a question already or think of something as you listen, please put a question in the chat. We will be sure to address those questions at the end. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Neil.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar. Glad you're here. Thanks for giving us some of your time. So how I view my portion of this talk is simply as a time for you to think through how you can help your child warm up from where they are now to where they're going to be maybe in a couple days or in a couple short weeks from a social and emotional perspective. So I'd like to start with a bit of a personal exercise to help us with our empathy and acknowledgement. Take a moment and think back to when you were a kid entering a new grade, whether that's 7th, 8th, 9th, 12th grade, you're going off to college, you're starting grad school. And it can also apply to how you're doing right now if you're starting a new job, or you just bought a home, or you're hitting this milestone in your life. How are you feeling, or how were you feeling going into that big shift? And as you're thinking about that, consider who in your life at that time you're thinking about you were willing to talk to about that. Who were you sharing how you were feeling about entering 7th grade? Who were you talking to about your excitement or terror about going off to college? Maybe you had a fantastic connection with the adults in your life, with a parent, and you were transparent about that. Maybe you did, but you just weren't going to tell anybody. If you were like me, you were both excited and terrified for those milestones, and there was no chance you were going to tell anyone that you were feeling those things. You're just going to do your best to project confidence. Your child might be anywhere along that spectrum, and that's okay. My guidance for you is to encourage you to find a space in your day, in the days to come, to carve out a moment to ask your kid that very question. How are you feeling about the start of the school year? And then we'll talk a bit more as I go on, but just to listen, validate, normalize, and fight the urge to solve. But before you do that, I think it's important to do this acknowledge piece. if we're thinking back to your experience transitioning to middle school or high school, starting a new grade, versus where your child is at now, I think it's fair to say, regardless of how old you are, the world has changed significantly. There are things your students are navigating that you and I didn't have to. First, they've had a significantly disrupted past few school years. We've been learning remotely in many instances, wearing masks, social distancing. There are local and global anxieties. There's the complexity of social engagement through social medias and cell phones, and apps and platforms that your kids are using that you and I don't even know exist. And then there's society's evolving understanding of and engagement with race, privilege, gender identity, attraction, and so much more. And it is crucial, if you're going to have any success with your kid in these conversations, to find a way to acknowledge that what they are navigating is different than what you navigated. The world isn't completely different. There are some similarities. People are still anxious for new beginnings and excited to see friends and worried that they're going to embarrass themselves in the first day of class. All that is the same. But a lot has changed, and I think you will have the most success engaging your kid in conversation if you acknowledge that you don't know everything and they are navigating things that you didn't have to navigate. So then you get to the listen piece. As much as you can, just listen, and that's it. Just listen to your kid talk, give them a chance to feel heard, and then validate whatever it is that they are feeling. If they're excited, awesome. It's great to be excited about going back to school. Lots of people are excited for it. If they're terribly anxious and nervous, that's okay too. Most people are anxious and nervous to go back to school. Often, or perhaps especially, their teachers. It's not just the kids in the room, and I think it's important to validate that people experience those emotions, big, little, young and old, and that's okay. Next, I think it's really important for you to fight the urge to solve whatever your child might be sharing with you. And that can be really difficult because you don't want your kid to be in pain. You don't want them to be uncomfortable. You want to set them up for success. And one of the ways you can set them up for success is by giving them the tools to solve their own problems and to be a bit uncomfortable. That's important. So, for example, let's say you could respond to your child. Okay, so you're worried you won't know anyone in your class. I remember feeling that way too. Let's think together about how you might start a conversation with somebody. So you heard them, you listened to them, you validated, you empathized, you normalized, and now you're not solving the problem, but you're kind of teeing it up for them to think through how they might navigate that situation come day one. What you're not going to do, I encourage you not to do, is email that your student's teacher to get a list of everyone in that class and a list of all their interests and get ahead of it. That's trying to solve the problem for your kid. Try and be collaborative about it with them. I think you'll have the most success. Moving on down, try to balance the conversation. You might have a student who is just listing off anxiety after anxiety and worry after worry, and listening, validating, normalizing that is important, but then also try and balance that conversation. Guide them to think about something, anything that might be a positive, whether it's the lunch, whether it's seeing someone they haven't seen in a while. Get creative with it, but try and find a bit of balance in that conversation. And this might be a bit counterintuitive, but the reverse as well. If everything's sunshine and rainbows and they're excited and everything's going to be perfect about school, great, but also open the door for them. Okay, is there anything you're a little worried about? I'm not encouraging you to go fishing for pain, but I am encouraging you to acknowledge that you can be excited and you can be anxious at the same time and nervous, and allowing your kid to talk about that, I think, is really helping. All right, model with yourself and others. You might be sitting there in the audience thinking, Neil, this is great, but there is no chance my kid's ever going to talk to me. I get 3 words out of them. I'm not going to get, like, how are you emotionally feeling about the start of the school year? It's going to be crickets. And that might be your reality. And I I hope you believe that in time that will shift. It often does. But in this moment, your best bet is to still try. Don't give up on this conversation, and try and model it for them. So model it with yourself, model it with people in your life, in your child's life that have the skills to have this conversation, whether that's with a spouse, an aunt and uncle, an older sibling who's going off to college. Prep with them and model in front of your younger child what these conversations can sound like. If they hear two parents talking about their excitements and their anxieties about starting a new job, that gives them a bit of permission and language to talk about how they're feeling about their own transition into a new school or a new school year. And with you, if you have older kids, eye contact can be hard sometimes. Maybe you have a high schooler, and you might find that when you're driving in the car together, that's a good time to have this kind of conversation where you're not looking right at each other. You both have distractions and other things to keep your attention. It might like lower the stakes a little bit to be vulnerable and talk about how one is feeling. Finally, routine. I can't stress this enough. And I'm veering a bit off of my own topic and into Dr. G's, so I won't go too in depth, but routine is essential for children and adolescents to thrive and be successful. It is our responsibility as educators, as parents, as adults in their lives to structure that routine, provide it for them. And summer sometimes does not have a whole lot of routine. And that's great for kids to experience that, but we all need to help our students get from where they are now in terms of routine to where they will need to be in 2 short weeks. And that can require quite a bit of adjustment, whether that's with fitness, with sleep, with nutrition. And I'll tee it up for you, Dr. G, because I think you're going to touch on a number of those.
Yes. You want me to just go, Kelly? Or
Go right
Thanks,
ahead.
Neil. That was great. Yes, I can. Well, I'm older than most of you, so yes, I have many of those moments of terror on one side and pure excitement on the other, and it does balance itself out. You just have to take a deep breath and look for the support around you, right? So when we, as a family physician, that's my training, we're always thinking in terms of good, basic, healthy routines. And, the physiology of the body responds well to good nutrition, good sleep, and exercise. Those are the 3 things that I'm going to mention this morning. And I think this sort of thinking again, I think we get caught up in the schedule and everything else, and we lose sight of some of the things that we should be trying to balance through that day, and basically figure out what the needs of your individual child. I can't give you a diet that's going to work for everybody, and no dietitian can either, but there are some general concepts that you need to think about. And one of the things, as I've worked with dietitians over the years, I think balance is one of the things that is really critical in dietary consumption. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, you can't eat too much protein and you shouldn't eat any carbohydrates and this is bad, that kind of stuff. The body needs protein, it needs carbohydrates, it needs fats and vitamins and minerals to function physiologically at its optimum, to think and learn and to exercise and everything else. So the diet is one way to gather as much of those nutrients as possible. Sometimes people have dietary restrictions or don't do well tolerating certain foods, etc., and you may need to supplement with a vitamin, but it's never a good idea to supplement only with the vitamin and skip the food. The body likes the food to deliver those vitamins and minerals. And I think, carbohydrates for years have gotten a really bad rap. Oh, carbs are bad. Don't talk about them. Don't eat them, that kind of thing. But they are an essential component of muscle function and performance. And so you have to have that balance of the carbohydrates, okay? Proteins, they should be good lean proteins, meat, fish, chicken, whatever the preference. You can get, if you're vegan. You can get proteins from beans and legumes, but sometimes that's a little more challenging. And if your student is struggling, it might be helpful to visit with a dietitian to help them find other methods of gaining proper intake. Carbohydrates, everybody automatically thinks of cake and cookies. Well, those do fall under that category, but that's more in the refined sugar kind of category. Whereas carbohydrates of, whole grain breads and grains, as well as fruits and some vegetables also fall under the carbohydrates. So carbohydrate is not, the devil that many have touted it to be. Fats you need for a lot of cell function, a lot of enzymes require fats to function properly in cells. And you want to get the good, healthy monounsaturated fats, olive oil, those types of things. Think of food as fuel or energy production. I think especially in young women, the diet and the body image can become an issue, and they consider food the enemy, but you have to think of it as the fueling or the gasoline that goes in your car of your body. And there are no bad foods. This is one thing I've learned from dietitians. There's no such thing as a bad food. There are things that you probably don't want to eat every day, like cupcakes and cookies, although having those as a smaller part of your diet is not, incorrect or negative, okay? So trying to, decriminalize, certain foods and just make it a good, healthy balance and moderation of any of the foods that might not be as good for you as, and fuel that good body function. The other thing that is essential, and I find this in my practice, just even with the athletes that come in, but also when I was doing family medicine, these kids do not get enough sleep. In the adolescent age group, they need 8 to 10 hours per night, and that has to be regularly scheduled, okay? These young brains are still developing, and the only way the brain grows and develops is when it's good, restful sleep. Okay, so I think it's really important. And as Neil pointed out, the routine with sleep is key to getting them sleeping on a regular schedule and a regular basis. We term sleep hygiene, meaning putting the environment into the optimal situation for being able to fall asleep. We expect people, if it's a normal falling asleep time is 20 to 30 minutes. It's kind of hard to know if you've already fallen asleep, but if you're looking at the clock an hour and a half later, then that's could be problematic. Some of the things, especially in this day and age, with the phones and the screens, the blue light decreases the melatonin in your body. And melatonin is what induces the sleep for the brain. So a quiet time, 30 minutes before bed. So no homework, no, snacks or any of that kind of stuff. It's just sort of quiet time, maybe reading a book or listening to music and then going to bed. We recommend 2 hours before trying to go to sleep, avoid a really heavy meal because that can upset the melatonin balance as well. Exercise, although it's good, we don't want to do it within 2 hours of trying to go to sleep. And caffeine is a problem, as well as nicotine in the form of vaping, maybe less so cigarettes in this day and age, but the vaping can be a factor in overdosing on or not overdosing, but getting excessive nicotine that can affect their sleep because those are stimulants. Nicotine and caffeine are stimulants. Exercise is good to do, not 2 hours before sleep, but being physically fatigued, I often find athletes that are out from an injury sometimes have trouble sleeping because they've not been able to keep up with their normal level of energy exertion, and then they're all bundled up and energetic by the time they're trying to go to sleep. The other thing is they don't sleep well the night before. They get through school, they come home and take a 4-hour nap, and then they can't go to sleep 2 hours later. So try to avoid that. Maybe a rest, we say no more than about 30 minutes. They need just the cat nap, so to speak, to sort of recharge them. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Exercise, this is where I spend most of my time working these days. We know it's well studied and well proven that it's important for physical and mental health. Sports obviously are a popular activity and they have many benefits. Gets into meeting new friends, having teammates. It can be tremendous for the social aspect. And 60 minutes a day is recommended by the CDC for adolescents and everybody really. Some form of exercise. It doesn't have to be a sport, but walking or cycling or working out, whatever your preference. And there are many forms. Obviously, you can do the sports, which are very organized and directed, or perhaps someone just likes riding their bike or running or doing weight training. And all of those things are perfectly valid. It doesn't have to be an organized sport, and you don't have to do 4 organized sports to meet that requirement. And I would actually encourage in this age group not to overdo it because their bodies are changing. They grow very quickly, many of them in this early adolescent age group. And what happens is the bones grow first very quickly. Muscles and tendons take 3 times as long to do that same amount of growing. And so you automatically are right into a disconnect in terms of flexibility and strength, balance, control of the muscles, etc. And that's just a recipe for overuse injury, which is a lot of what we see. One of the questions we get a lot is it safe for adolescents to do weight training? Yes, it is. That doesn't mean they're lifting 500-pound dumbbells, but you can do weight training with very light hand weights with resistance, and that helps build up muscle tone. And we actually encourage athletes or anybody who's thinking of participating in a sport, taking up a program, 4 to 6 weeks of preparation or conditioning prior to that sport season. I cannot tell you how many, in the next month or 2, we're going to see a ton of overuse injuries from cross country, from soccer, because people were running around all summer, not doing, active, but not really training. Then they jump into 3 hours a day of sports training and their body simply isn't ready. I say this all the time, that you can't get to be a well-trained athlete or be athletic by simply playing your sport. You have to do stuff outside of that. And that doesn't matter what age you are or what level you are. It's true across the board. And there's not an athlete, a successful athlete, especially out there, that doesn't spend equal or more time doing conditioning training outside of their actual sport participation in order to prepare their body for participation. And so just like Neil said, sort of get prepared, think of it in those terms, that you can't just put the shoes on and pick up the lacrosse stick and be ready. The body has to be prepared. And that's especially true, as I said, during that quick growth spurt, which often affects the 8th, 9th grade age group. But, sports are great, and just have to handle them correctly. And, at Chapel Hill, we have Shauna, who's an excellent athletic trainer and can also advise and guide the students to preparing and recovering, hopefully not from injuries. I think that's all I had to say. I don't know if there's any questions yet.
No, we'll save the questions. So thank you, Ellen.
Okay.
We'll let Kasey take over and getting ready for that first day.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, Neil and Ellen. What I'm going to be talking about today is going off to school. And what I would like to do is direct my talk actually towards the students. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is getting to know your school. Because many students, especially as they're either going into middle school or maybe they're switching from middle school to junior high, are starting new schools. So you should consider visiting your new school, whether it be in person or actually online. So school websites often provide a lot of useful information to students, and this includes the description of classes that you might be taking, teacher profiles, and pictures of the school. So sometimes this can actually reduce some anxiety or nervousness about the school just by exploring the website itself. Also, if you're giving your schedule, including the classroom numbers, which can sometimes happen, and there are opportunities to see the school beforehand, you should go and scope it out. It will certainly help you feel more prepared and comfortable by the time classes start if you know where you're going, especially if your school is a campus if there's multiple buildings, or if everything kind of looks similar and you want to get an idea before you get started. If your school has a registration day or an orientation, it'd be valuable to seek out your teachers that are listed on your schedule, introduce yourself, the school nurse, the school counselor, or other people that you think are going to be helpful and useful for you. Simply introducing yourself can go a long way, and it can also reduce that nervousness for when you have to do it when you enter the classroom. And finally, if there's a meet and greet, you should go to it and introduce yourself to your new classmates. Keep in mind that everyone is just as nervous and anxious as you are to start. So being that person that goes and takes that initiative will help you feel better and help the other person feel better. The next thing is to prepare for your first day. So everyone gets anxious before school begins. As Neil mentioned, even teachers, I know I do. I'd say especially teachers. And as a teacher, some of the ways I prepare is to make a list of materials I need and go shopping for them ahead of time, so I'm ready when school comes around. So some schools are going to provide a supply list. But if your school does not provide a supply list or provides it a little bit later, you shouldn't worry too much about it. Don't feel obligated to go out and buy all the supplies right away. It may turn out that you don't even need those gel pens or color-coded binders or other fun fidgets that you think you might need. Instead, choose some supplies that you know you like and work well for you. So some staples I always have are my laptop and my charger, a planner, a pen, a notebook, and a folder. These, along with a refillable water bottle so you can stay hydrated during the day, and you're good to go. And if you're given a schedule ahead of time, having that written down or printed out is always a good thing to have. And finally, the last thing that I want to talk about today is getting involved in your community from the beginning. So one way to feel like you belong in a community is to truly become involved in it. So here are some tips to build some authentic and valuable connections. Also, the more your time is structured, as was mentioned in previous discussions, the more successful and happy you'll actually be. So the first thing, join an after-school activity. Even if you've never played a sport or been involved in an extracurricular such as theater, it's never too late to start. It's a great way to forge friendships, work as a team, and often, especially if it's a sport, get some exercise in because it helps create that valuable balance that we've discussed. And it's actually proven that if you get some exercise in before you go and maybe tackle some homework, you're going to be more alert and awake for it, and it's going to go better for you. Another thing is to join a club. So if you have a specific interest, joining a club or starting a new one, if your school allows that, is a great way to get involved on campus. Another thing is volunteering. So many schools require students to complete a certain number of service projects or community service hours. And even if your school doesn't, it's a really important and valuable thing to do as a teenager. So if your school requires it, or even if it doesn't, this is something you don't want to leave until the last minute because it could pile up. And volunteering is another great way to make friends. So you should sign up for a weekend trip to a soup kitchen or ask a classmate to join and offer to help at a local nursing home or any other type of ways to get involved in your community locally. And if you're not sure that you want to add another new place to your plate, ask who you can help out at your school because there's often service learning opportunities that your school coordinates, or there are opportunities to just help out maybe in admissions or help out with school tours or things such as that. Running for office is another great idea. So most schools have leadership positions in student government or student councils. And running for office and following through on those responsibilities can help make your school a better place. So who wouldn't want to be a part of that type of change? And finally, and this is a really fun one, especially if you dislike some of those icebreakers that teachers do at the beginning of the year, before the first day of school, consider writing a letter to your advisor, to your guidance counselor, to your homeroom teacher. It's a great way to practice advocating for yourself because we know it's always not easy to get help, but there will be times during the year when you're going to need a guiding hand. Explain what you're looking forward to, what you're nervous about, and don't forget to include some fun facts that your teacher might never think to ask. Because sometimes doing something as small as this will actually go a really long way. So, those are my tips for how to get off to school. And Kelly, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kasey. All right. Thank you all. That was wonderful. Lots of good information. And we do have some questions. And I'm actually going to go back. I think we'll start with Kasey on this very first one. And Ellen or Neil, if you have suggestions. This is a very specific question. Nervous about having a locker for the first time. So how do you find it, forgetting the combination? Any thoughts or tips on navigating using a locker for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have a locker, it can be really helpful to not put a lot of strain on your back or on your shoulders carrying things around. But using it for the first time can be complicated, especially if it's one of those crazy locks. So I would say, especially at the beginning of the year, keep your staple stuff that you know that you really need with you. Like maybe your notebook, a folder, a pen or a pencil, things like that. But anything that you're given that you don't need right away, such as the textbooks that your teachers provide you or other things, that can go in the locker. And I would say if you're having any trouble with combinations, seek out someone and ask them for help. Oftentimes, other students are really wonderful to help you get started on doing those types of things.
I might also add that if you've never had experience with a combination lock, or that it's not a bad idea just to get one and practice how it works, even if the combination is going to be a little different from your school locker. Just the practice. I know our lockers here can be a little finicky sometimes, but Kasey's right. We all help each other out with those lockers. But don't stress over it. It's something that we all figure out, and we'll make it through. All right. This could be for any of our panelists, but perhaps we'll start with Neil. Any ideas on helping siblings comparing their success in school to one another? As a big sister, I know those conversations happen in my house.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think as the adult in that house, do everything you can to not do that. Not compare your kids right against each other, right? Everyone's unique and different and has their own strengths and challenges. And if your child hears you comparing them to their older sibling, or Kelly had such a great 9th grade year, you will too. Try and avoid that. And if it's not coming from you, if it's coming from them, try and disrupt it. Try and remind them that everyone's allowed to and encouraged to have their own experience. That's what makes life interesting and enjoyable, the good and the bad. And there's not a set of milestones or markers they must achieve by a certain grade level or relative to their peer. That's a tough one. So be mindful of it, listen for it, catch yourself doing it if you are, catch the siblings doing it if they are, and try and disrupt it.
Ellen or Kasey, anything you might want to add?
Well, having raised twin girls, I'd say at least once a week we had some kind of, oh, she did it better than I did, as Neil said, they're each unique individuals, and I think they don't understand that innately, and you have to, as a parent, reinforce that and emphasize it. And eventually, if you say it enough times and they find their own path to success, then they recognize it. Well, I'm good at this, but she's not good at that, kind of thing. But yeah, that's not an unusual, it's a great question.
I would also add that some schools offer opportunities for different types of not only extracurriculars, but oftentimes electives, especially like in older middle school grades or early 9th grade or 10th grade. And I would say making sure that you encourage your student to explore the variety of options that there are, instead of just being like, oh, well, your older sister, your older brother did this class, maybe you should do it too. I think that always helps because it helps create things that are personal and individual to them, and it gives them autonomy in the situation.
That's a great idea, Kasey. Thank you all. I would also add that I think it's important to that's a good opportunity to seek out new people in a community. So I know that when I was new here and someone introduced themselves as the sibling of another student, I said, oh, I don't know that person, but I'd like to know you. And make the new people don't have those preconceived notions about siblings. So I think that can be a good place to connect and help other new people feel welcome in the community. All right, we have another one here.
Kelly, sorry, can I add
yeah.
one piece? And it kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier, and I didn't get a chance to emphasize it. No matter what you're saying to or with or in front of your child, if you want it to have a positive impact, it's got to be genuine. It has to be authentic. So I'm thinking through this example of siblings comparing each other. If you enter that conversation and you try and build up one of your kids and it's not coming across as genuine or authentic, it's going to backfire. It's not going to be helpful. Or if you're trying to model for them that you too are nervous about starting a new job, but everyone in that house knows that you don't get nervous about starting a new job, like that's not going to be helpful. So wherever you're trying to access the conversation, be genuine. That's your best shot.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, we have another one here. Can we offer any tips on staying connected with teachers without being overbearing? All right, I'll get us started here and then I'll let you jump in. I think it's a balance. I think it's important to know right up front from your school how the school expects communication to flow back and forth. And so here at Chapel Hill-Chauncy Hall, we're going to have a registration day with a meeting for parents where parents will hear from the class deans and from some other administrators. And they will have a very clear understanding from that first day of how we like our communication to flow and what we as educators and teachers here in the community value as communication. So we really value our weekly progress notes that go out to all families that teachers write. And other schools may not have a system such as that. So they may have another method of sharing information with families. So I think understanding a school's preferred system and best workflow, if you will, from the very start is a good place to go. Neil, Kasey, Ellen, any other thoughts?
I think once you've identified that person or those people who you will have a closer connection with or more regular contact with, I think it's appropriate to be transparent with them. I want to know as much as I can, as much as is reasonable, what works for you, teacher, what works with your schedule, what's a reasonable request for a chance to get an email update or a conversation. Be transparent. If you want to have regular conversation, let them know, and the teacher will hopefully find a compromise with you, set that boundary, and find a way to keep you informed.
I would say that I agree with what everyone has said so far. And I would just add that giving students knowledge, giving your child knowledge that you're contacting the teacher that you've been in contact is really important. You don't want to be sneaky about it. You want that student to feel like we are all part of a team to help. And it's never something that is punitive or anything like that, but just something that we are all working together to ensure their success.
Kasey went right where I was going to go. And I think it's important to keep in mind that that may shift a little bit from elementary school to middle school to high school. And there may be times by the time you get to high school where a student is working with their teacher or their advisor or someone on campus and may not always want to bring parents into the loop. But certainly keeping students in the loop and making this a real team effort is where we're going to all find success. Do we have any? We don't have any other questions in the chat at the moment. So thank you all for sharing those questions though. We wanted to just remind you that Chapel Hill-Chauncy Hall will be having an open house, two in fact, one in October and one in November, where you can come and learn more about our soon to be open middle school program and also our wonderful high school. And we welcome you to come visit, stop by, see all of us. And please, if you do have any questions, My email is right here. We're happy to continue this conversation with you. I'd like to thank our panelists, Kasey, Neil, and Ellen, for taking some time out of their final weeks of the summer to help out today. And it has been a pleasure working with all of you. And with that, thank you all and have a very happy new school year.